Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. My name is Savitri Krishnamurthy. I teach English and reasoning. Today I will be doing an analysis of the logical reasoning section of the Mega Mock challenge that happened from April 3rd to 5th. All of you who took the test, tell me how you fared on the test. And those of you who did not take the test and are just attending the session, I will explain each of the passages to you, so you will also learn a lot about attempting the LR sections in our mocks and eventually how to do well in CLAT. Right? Ready? Good afternoon to everybody. Lots of you here. Thank you for joining. Ashmita, Krishna, Shriya, Bittu, Movix, Kanya, Anisha. Welcome. Let us start. How did you do in the test? Let me see. How was the reasoning section? Easier than English, tougher than English? Easier E, tougher T. Quickly. If you've seen CLAT 2021 paper and our reasoning section was based on the CLAT 2021 paper, the reasoning section was easier than the English section. The passages looked just like English. The only missing factor was in English you have a vocabulary question, 1 or 2, and in reasoning they did not ask any vocabulary questions. Instead, it went to strengthening and weakening. All right, hello Ragini, Khushi, and everyone who's joined me now on YouTube. Great to see you all, but great to see so many faces, so many names. It was moderate, all right. It was okay, let's call it moderate. Let's look at what it was like, because our mock was exactly pattern on the 2021 is pattern on 2021. So if you found it moderate, that means you'll find the 2021, that is last year's paper, also moderate. English, we have 6 sections, which 6 passages that I discussed yesterday. Today in CR, we will be also discussing 6 passages. As I told you, these 6 passages, you would at least attempt 5 passages with maximum accuracy in the 20-25 minutes you assign to it. The topics were mostly COVID, because in 2021 there were at least 2 passages on COVID in the critical reasoning section. COVID and psychology, COVID and education, COVID and the economy, 1 on general economy and 1 on general politics. All the kinds of topics that you find in the English language section also. So life has become easier, if you ask me, for CLAT students. And we took all the passages from editorials, 2 from Indian newspapers and 2 from foreign newspapers. So in a couple of passages, the language will be a little more difficult than the Indian newspaper. Actually, the Indian newspaper editorials have tougher words than the foreign language, foreign editions. I'll tell you how when we do for classes in English. Okay, we are coming up with a huge set of lessons and mocks, but today our mock is going to be an analysis of the mock that you took. All right. Remember the first passage? It was on anxiety issue due to COVID-19. I'm going to read it. I'm going to simplify it for you and do this analysis in detail. All right. But you have, on your part, read the passage on your own and simplify it on your own and see if the summary that you have done of a paragraph is similar to mine. That's the best way to read. Clear? Let's start. All right? Okay. COVID has increased anxiety for many of us, and experts warn a sizable minority could be left with mental health problems that outlast the pandemic. COVID, many of us had mental health issues, but for some people, even after COVID is over, the mental health issues will continue. One reason psychologists are concerned about the potential long-term impact of COVID-19. Why are they worrying about long-term impacts of COVID-19? Existing insights from previous pandemics and national emergencies. So they have existing details about earlier pandemics, earlier emergencies, and from there, whatever insights, whatever knowledge they have gathered, based on that, they say COVID-19's impact could also have a long-lasting effect. Clear? Next. The SARS outbreak in 2003 was associated with a 30% increase in suicides in people over the age of 65. Strategies like quarantine that are necessary to minimize viral spread can have a negative psychological impact, such as causing post-traumatic stress symptoms, depression, and insomnia. So where does he take us? He takes us back to the SARS outbreak of 2003. And he said in that outbreak, there were so many suicides. In viral infections, viral pandemics, there are governments resort to strategies, and one of the strategies is quarantining. All of us had to sit inside our house, right? If there was a family which had an infection, they had to be isolated, separated from the rest. But these quarantine strategies can have a negative psychological impact. That is what the author is saying, and he's talking about the other negative psychological impacts. Okay, job loss, financial struggles during a global economic downturn have been associated with a long-lasting decline in mental health. Clear? So what are the effects of the pandemic is what he has singled out. One piece of research is a retrospective insomnia. Meaning of insomnia is lack of sleep, sleeplessness. That is insomnia. All right. One piece of research is a retrospective view. Retrospect means looking back. Retrospective review of the impact of the Chernobyl nuclear accident in Ukraine. Researchers found that 2 decades later, 20 years later, first responders had elevated rates of depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. They also concluded that mental health effects were the most significant consequence of the disaster, which led to thousands of deaths, deeply damaged the region's economy. Similarly, research suggests mental health problems, particularly psychological distress and PTSD, remained an issue for people who lost their homes during the Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. Why did I read that fast? The entire second paragraph is not talking about COVID-19. The entire second paragraph is talking about not visible. Khushi, maybe only for you. I'm sure for the others it is visible. Nobody has said it's not visible. Maybe you should refresh and come back. Yeah. Okay. Now, why did I read the second paragraph very fast? Because they're talking of the negative effects of Chernobyl disaster and Hurricane Katrina. If there is a question on it, we shall go back to it. Right now, we're talking about COVID and its impact, the psychological impact of COVID. So, we will read that in detail. Hope we are anticipating there will be more questions on that, right? Okay. This was exacerbated. Exacerbate means worsen. A situation is bad. If you make it worse, we call it exacerbating. This was exacerbated among those who had poor mental health or a low income before the hurricane. So hurricane had bad impact on everybody. It was worse for people who already were in a bad condition. As for which mental health issues connected to the COVID, now from here we're going to focus. As for which mental health issues connected to the COVID-19 pandemic are most likely to last in the longer term, psychologists believe obsessive compulsive disorder could be one of the main candidates. So during COVID, what do psychologists think? They think OCDs will become worse. Obsessive compulsive disorders. It could have a long-term impact. Why? Because OCD arises from an interaction between genes and environmental factors. If somebody already has a genetic predisposition towards OCD, the environmental factors of COVID changed such that OCD becomes worse. For people with a genetic predisposition towards some form of OCD, what is OCD has been explained in brackets. Remember, in CR passages, what is given in brackets is also important. Contamination, obsessions, and cleaning compulsions, right? Some people keep cleaning all the time. That's called an OCD because they always feel there are germs around. Or there are people who are very afraid of contamination. So during the pandemic, these two feelings became worse, right? So the stress of COVID-19 is likely to trigger OCDs. Clear? First paragraph, he said COVID-19 could have a long-term mental health impact. Second paragraph, how do you know this? Well, we have the past history of insights from Hurricane Katrina and Chernobyl disaster. What is the worst, what is the one kind of mental health issue that will be most impacted by COVID-19? Obsessive compulsive disorders. So far so good, understood? All right, let's look at the next part. General anxiety is also a very important mental health issue to watch out for. People who tend to feel anxious more easily will continue to feel this, and the condition might worsen. Even when the pandemic ends, some people might be over anxious, keep worrying about variant strains. See, right now India's opened up, right? We say COVID is gone, but there are still some people who are worrying, what if there is a new variant, one case in Mumbai, they'll be worrying about it. So that is what the author is talking about. Again, these two are the second and third factors, mental health issues which could become worse during COVID. We will come back to this if it is important. But remember, mental health issues, Chernobyl, Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, OCD, general anxiety, chronic loneliness. These are the main ones that the passage has talked about. Easy. What is the main argument of the passage? Now, what's the difference between English and CR? English, they'll say, what's the main idea? What's the central theme? What does critical reasoning, logical reasoning say? What's the main argument? Same thing. What's the main point? What's his main argument? There have been as many deaths due to mental health issues as physical ailments due to COVID-19 pandemic. Did he compare mental to physical illnesses in terms of which was worse? No. The COVID-19 suicide numbers have overtaken SARS suicide numbers. Remember, he told us about SARS suicide numbers in people over 65. But he has not said anything about suicides due to COVID. Correct, so 2 is out. A lot of people could suffer from mental health problems as a result of increased anxiety caused by the pandemic. Lots of C's in your answer. There is one D. D, whoever has marked D, look at why it is wrong. Why is it wrong? The possibility of a majority of people suffering from long-term mental health issues as a result of the pandemic. There is one word that makes it wrong. The possibility is remote, means there is very little chance that people will suffer from mental health issues. Is that what the passage said? No. It's the exact opposite of what the passage has said. Therefore, the person who has marked it as D, you have been very careless. Remote means very far away, very less chance of it happening. Okay, so the correct answer is C. All right, all of you. No, good. Somebody, Ragini, marked one answer, changed it, corrected herself. Excellent. All right. Which of the issues is most likely to have a long-term impact? You read the passage, you know your facts thoroughly. The question is very easy. You have to get it right. Quickly give me the answer. General anxiety issues among people are likely to be exacerbated, worsened in the long term as a result of the pandemic. Anxiety due to loss of job and financial security due to COVID-19 is likely to have a long-term impact. Obsessive compulsive disorders could have a long-term impact, or chronic loneliness. Which of these sentences from the passage? All of them have been mentioned as impacts of the pandemic, but this has been mentioned as the possible long-term impact. Therefore, it has to be C. Clear? All of you clear on that? Yes? Okay. Next one. Which one strengthens the author's claim? Now, how do you answer strengthen questions? What strengthens a conclusion? We use a premise to strengthen a conclusion. So, some of you must have said, yesterday Savitri ma'am did the English analysis. Today, she will do the CR analysis. Okay. Now, which of the options will strengthen my claim? On what basis did you come to the conclusion that I will do the CR analysis today? On the basis of the fact that I did the English analysis yesterday. So, how will I strengthen the claim that I'm going to do the CR analysis today? Your conclusion. one option which says the teacher who does the analysis for English also does the analysis for CR at BYJU'S Exam Prep. Then you will say, now the conclusion that I am going to do the CR analysis looks even stronger. That's how you strengthen an argument. So which one will strengthen the author's claim that of all the mental issues, OCD is likely to have a really long-term impact. So you look for a fact which says OCD will have a long-term impact. Some extra fact about OCD and the pandemic which says, yes, your conclusion is correct that OCD will have a long-term impact. Is it option A? Studies of earlier pandemics have revealed that job loss and financial struggles result in a long-lasting decline in mental health. Psychologists reported that many of their patients who had contamination, obsession, and cleaning compulsions became chronic germophobes. What is phobia? An obsessive fear. Who is a germaphobe? A person who is frightened irrationally about germs. The moment he steps out, he'll say, oh, some germ will be around me. So that's a germaphobe. All of us have fear of germs, but somebody who cannot even function properly because he's so worried about germs is called a germaphobe. Psychologists reported an increasing number of patients seeking treatment for anxiety and depression, or D, that experts have reassured people that the mental health issues that arose will disappear once life goes back to the pandemic. Is it A, B, C, or D? I'm seeing a lot of answers for A, some answers for B. How will this strengthen? Job loss and financial struggles will lead to a mental. You have to strengthen this bit. OCD will have the longest impact. Which one of these points to an OCD? An obsessive fear, an irrational fear, an irrational mental issue which arises out of an irrational fear of something. Only this. If somebody, if psychologists say, do you know, after the pandemic, I have had lot of people who have more afraid of contamination, who are more afraid of germs than before. That is an OCD. And the definition of an OCD has been given in the passage. The definition is cleaning and contamination obsession. Therefore, it is B. It cannot be A. A is talking of job loss and financial security and decline in health. That will not strengthen the author's argument. That is the general argument that mental health issues will be there. But that doesn't strengthen his argument that OCDs will become more. You understand the difference? Yeah? Okay. Next one. They, that is the researchers, also concluded that mental health effects were the most significant consequence of the disaster, which led to thousands of deaths and deeply damaged the region's economy. One classic question in CR is where they give a quote from the passage and they say, which of the following conclusions can be drawn from the above statement? All you need to do is rephrase the quote in your own ways. The most important or significant notable results of the disaster. Which disaster? Could be hurricane, could be, I think this was more in terms of Chernobyl. That led to thousands of deaths. In Chernobyl, the worst effect was mental health was the most significant effect. Of what? Of the disaster. Why? The disaster led to deaths and damage to the economy, and this affected the people mentally. Correct? That will be your conclusion in other words. So now let's look at the options. Mental health effects were higher in regions with more deaths than economic damage due to the disaster. What has he done? He talked about death and damage, right? He said the mental health problems arose because of death and damage. Correct? Damage to economy. Now what did the answer option do? It compared death and damage. It goes out of scope by saying more deaths than more damage economically, more economic damage than more deaths. That is how a wrong option is found. That's not correct. Mental health effects were higher in regions that experienced more economic damage than deaths. The same thing put in the other way around Same issue. He says mental health issues arose because of deaths and loss in economy. Money, people must have lost lots of money, people must have suddenly become from rich to poor, whatever it was. Here what he has done, he has compared the two effects. This was more than this was more than this. That is not what the option has, passage has said. So A and B are out. Many of you marking B, no, he did not say A, he did not say B. The loss of lives and damage to the economy resulted in mental health issues. The disaster gave rise, people who experienced the disaster, 20 years later also they were found with mental health issues. So the author said that mental health effects, the mental health effect was the most notable consequence of the Chernobyl disaster. And the Chernobyl disaster's effect was lot of death and damage to the region's economy. There was, let's say COVID-19 is there. During the second wave of COVID-19, India had a lot of deaths and the economy just went. These two people who experienced COVID-19, the second wave, may develop mental health issues. Why? Because either they were affected by the number of deaths, or they were affected by the economic problems, or both. Do you get the difference? A and B are just wrong because they just compare A to B. Deaths and damage is inconsequential, doesn't work. Therefore, what we are doing is we are just interpreting the sentence, and that is the conclusion. Remember to do that, because at least 50% of your CR conclusion questions in CLAT are based on questions like this. Very easy. All you have to do is read and understand. Iska matlab kya hua? And simplify it to yourselves. Clear? All right. Let's go with 5. Okay. Cleaning compulsion is an obsessive, unreasonable desire for anything. Navya. Okay. All right. Next one. Weaken. Now look at this. What is he saying? He wants you to weaken the claim in the passage. What is the claim in the passage? What is the author saying? He is saying chronic loneliness brought about by social isolation or a lack of meaning is another major concern. So what are the 3 main effects the author said of the COVID pandemic? Mental health issues. In mental health issues, why did the COVID pandemic result in mental health issues? First thing he said is OCD is increased because the pandemic was such. Quarantine, isolation, lockdown, stay in your houses all led to an increase in OCDs. Second one, general anxiety increase. People who have this tendency to worry, it became more because you have a lot of things to worry about. Every day you open the news, they'll say so many deaths, so many infections. So it increased the worry. Third thing they said that another cause of concern is that this COVID-19 led to chronic loneliness. You're sitting all locked up in your house. Imagine not going to school, not seeing your friends for years at a stretch. You're sitting at home. So that chronic long-term loneliness brought about by social isolation. So people thought life has become meaningless. These two things has another major concern. How will you weaken that claim? Okay. How will you weaken the claim of that social loneliness, chronic loneliness brought about by social isolation is a worrying factor. That chronic loneliness brought about a lack of meaning in life. So you have to show how that the benefits of the loneliness. Here he is talking of the negatives of social chronic loneliness. So you have to look at an option which will say loneliness is not that bad actually, it's a good thing, many people benefited from it. Then you are weakening. When I say, the loneliness during COVID, sitting in the house during COVID has done great mental damage to the students. How will you weaken the claim? You will say no, students sat at home, ate ghar ka khana, their mom and dad were there to take care of them, so they concentrated totally on their studies and they actually did better than in their studies. So then you are weakening my argument. Clear? So in this, which option weakens the argument? Tell me, A, B, C or D? Many people have admitted that they had fewer close connections in the age of social distancing and are finding it challenging to rebuild their network. So during social distancing, they lost all contact. Now they are finding it difficult to make friends. A negative of the social distancing and isolation. So that cannot weaken his claim. People are finding it more and more difficult to come out into the world and socialize with others. We have stayed at home for so long, locked up for so long, that people are finding it difficult to come to work every day, to come to school every day, to become friends with other people, to mingle with other people. That also is a negative of the isolation. So B is also not working. People's fear towards uncertainty and the unknown has become worse due to the prolonged life of social distancing and isolation. He is bringing out another negative. You're worried about what will happen in the future. Those worries became more when they sat at home and had time to think. So C is also not, by default it is D, but let's look at what D is saying. It was reported that the experience of the lockdown helped reduce anxiety levels among people who had high levels of stress in the outside world before the pandemic. Yes, D should be the answer. I'm glad all of you got it right. Obviously, if it says some people don't like going out, they're happy sitting at home. Because when they go out, when they hear the noise, the bustle, the traffic, they start getting anxiety issues. For those people, isolation was a fantastic thing. The pandemic, at least staying at home, helped. So that weakens the author's claim about the negative effects of the pandemic. Clear? So the answer is D. Alright, those of you who called it a moderate paper, now you will probably say it's an easy paper. But under the stress, the timed conditions, it was moderate. I agree. Alright, the second one. India's double abstention. If you abstain from something, it means you keep away from doing it. Right? This is Ramzan. During the month of Ramzan, people abstain from eating. That means they keep fasts. Correct? India abstained from voting. So you could vote for a proposal, you could vote against a proposal. India kept quiet. They said, vote nahi dena hai, neither for nor against. That's called abstaining. India's double abstention, that means twice it abstained on both the Russia moved and the Russia critiquing US resolutions, ensured some daylight between New Delhi and Beijing. This language is slightly different, right? Editorial, but little more modern English. Brought daylight means brought some clarity. What does daylight do? Daylight brings in clarity. So it said when India abstained from voting on the UN resolutions, it brought clarity, brought a little bit of clarity in India-China relations, because China voted for the pro-Russia resolution. But it didn't answer the question whether the costs of continued neutrality on Moscow's aggressions will outweigh the benefits. So one side it answered one question. India-China relations, it clarified things. We are on the same side as China. That's what he says. But it did not answer one question. This neutrality in the Ukraine-Russia crisis is what is India gaining from it and what is India losing from it? Are its losses way more than its gains? It didn't tell us that. From purely national interest calculations, this move didn't tell us whether we gained or whether we lost. Alright? Second part, S. Jaishankar, Foreign Minister, defended India's stance in Parliament. Alright? So, Ali is saying random topics, if CLAT gives, how will we answer? CLAT does not give random topics. The passages were easy to interpret because they were from editorials. Now, if you look at the CLAT CR passages or English passages of the last 3 years, ever since CLAT pattern change, they've all been based on current affairs, on one work of fiction in English. So they cannot give you from random topics. So the moral of the story is the passages are going to be easy. It's going to be on Russia-Ukraine crisis. It's going to be on COVID. It might be on the Sri Lankan crisis. It might be on the crisis in Pakistan that's going on now. Last 6 months before your test, right? All right. However, while national interest definitely means keeping an eye on Russian supply of arms to India, That dependence, as this newspaper has already argued, works both ways. What does that mean? India took a neutral stand because it wanted to, Russia supplying arms to India, and India wants that supply to go on. So in view of its national interest, it stayed neutral. But the author is saying it works both ways. Russian supply of arms to India is as important to India as it is to Russia. That's what he says when it says this works both ways. How does it work both ways? As the largest buyer of Russian arms, New Delhi also has leverage over Moscow. New Delhi also has a tool to control Moscow. Oh, we won't buy arms from you, then Russia, who is going to sell its arms to India? Is its largest arms buyer. Russia gets a lot of money from the arms that it sells to India. So he says that's a big, powerful tool in India's hands. Therefore, if India did take a principled stance on Russia, it's unlikely that the latter will retaliate by making arms supply difficult. If India had voted against Russia, taking a principled stand that attacking any country is wrong, so Russia attacked Ukraine, therefore it's wrong, Russia would not have said, oh, you voted against me, I will stop arms supply. The author says Russia would not retaliate by stopping the arms supply. Then comes the most interesting argument here. After all, despite EU nations sanctioning Russia, they have passed sanctions against Russia, no trade, cut off money, don't do this, don't supply that. Despite EU nations sanctioning Russia and actively aiding the Ukrainian resistance, they continue to buy Russian energy and Moscow is happy to supply. So one side the EU people have been shouting, passing sanctions against Russia, aiding the Ukrainian resistance movement. Other side they still have the supply of energy from Russia open, and Russia is also happily supplying them oil. That's what the author says. That is likely to be a point for the question. And Russia needs arms exports even more given the costs of sanctions on its economy. So the whole world, that is USA and its allies, have put sanctions on Russia. So right now the Russian economy needs the arms sales that is doing to India. So the author is saying because of the sanctions, Russia needs arms exports, which is a bargaining power that India can use diplomatically. Okay. Second, India's primary main worry should not be selling arms to Russia. All right. Then India's primary concern ought to be geopolitical implications of the conflict. Now I'll pause here. All right, 1 second. Somebody says how to attempt all CR questions in minimum time. When you are analyzing it, it's becoming easier. The whole point of the analysis is to make it easier, right? The best way to maximize your speed with maximum accuracy is to simplify the argument when you read it. Once you understand the main point of the argument, like the one that we did on in the earlier passage, all questions become easy. So the understanding of the argument is important. The comprehension of the argument is important. And how would you comprehend the argument? By reading it properly. It's connected, right? All right, let's go. So author is saying arms sale is not India's main concern. What should be India's main concern? The geopolitical implications of the conflict. India has to take other consequences. 2 points he has given. 1, right now Russia's military operations haven't gone according to plan. So if Russia decides to up the ante, what does up the ante mean? Increases the risk so that it gets a better advantage. If it becomes more aggressive and if it crushes Ukrainian resistance, if it becomes very brutal, if it becomes a very brutal war. Right now the war is not terribly brutal. We've heard of the number of killings of civilians, but he says if it makes it even more brutal, what will India do? Will it still sit on the wall to have taken such a cautious position? Will India sit out another UN resolution? Can India do that? In principle, is it correct? He's asking. Second, however the Ukrainian invasion ends, whether it ends with Russia taking over Ukraine or Russia pulling back from Ukraine, whichever way the conflict ends, if Putin is increasingly shunned by most of the democratic world with which India has much business to conduct, and China continues to be in his corner. So if Putin is shunned by the world, pushed away by the world, you attacked Ukraine, we're not going to be friendly with you. If the entire world shuns Putin, and if China is Putin's supporter anyway, what will be the implication, what will be the consequence that India will have to face? Because India is on friendly term with the rest of the world. But if it is seen as supporting Russia, what would be the consequence of that, he is asking. Okay, so what is the author's advice? It must keep an eye. It must be watchful. What are Russia's actions in Ukraine? What is Russia doing in Ukraine? Second, America and China's responses also it should take into account, and then it should be ready to change its mind in national interest. It doesn't matter. Don't stick to that policy that I've taken this before, I took a neutral stand, I'll stick to it. Author says no. Watch what Russia is doing, watch what America and China are doing, what their response is, and then take a response which is of maximum benefit to us as a nation, which is in our national interest. Clear? Easy? All right? Now, main point, you have to understand the main point, you have to read properly. Once you read the passage quickly and thoroughly, the passage becomes easy. If you keep worrying, I don't have the time, and you don't read the passage properly, you actually spend double the time to read the passage, and you don't get the questions correct either. All right. What is a consequence of India's neutrality as an inference question? So what can you say? India has been neutral. What is the result of this is what he's asking. What can you deduce to be the result of this neutrality? It will face problems in getting the present supply of arms from Russia. No, it has become neutral because it wants the supply of arms from Russia, right? So mark your answers, I'll come to that. India has to act cautiously, taking not only Russia's actions but also China and America's actions into account. This is what he said at the end. Okay, it will have to play second fiddle to China, not given. Sanctions from US and NATO, not given. It may be shunned by other democracies. People may look at us negatively, but he did not say anything about sanctions. So B, without any doubt, is the correct answer. It didn't say anything about being secondary to China. Remember, nothing has been said about that. It just said Putin is there and China is supporting Putin. All right, so the answer is B. Next question. Therefore, if India did take a principled stand on Russia, it is unlikely that the latter will retaliate by making arms supply difficult. Which one strengthens this statement? Author is saying even if India had voted according to principle, instead of thinking arms supply, so I shall abstain, still Russia would not have retaliated by stopping arms supply. Which one would strengthen this claim? Which of the statements would say, yes, if India had voted against Russia also, Russia would have continued supplying arms to India? Which option? A, India can't afford to alienate Russia. It cannot afford to anger or push away Russia and risk losing supply of arms. Would that strengthen? Russia might dominate India and dictate its foreign policy. India should not take a principled stand against Russia and should continue to sit on the fence. Or the economic sanctions against Russia makes India crucial to Russia and Russia's sales of arms. So because India is as important to Russia as Russian arms are to India, whatever India does, the author says, Russia will not retaliate, will not take counter action against India. All right? Okay. What is the central theme of the passage? That is the main point. India must change its position on the Russian invasion of Ukraine depending on the changing situation. Could it be A? No matter how the costs pile up, India must stick to its stand on Russia. India must toe the line of China. Toeing the line means follow China and America in its policy on Russia. India will pay a heavy price if it takes a principled stance on Russia. I prefer the word stand to stance, but the editorial itself has used the word stance, means position. All right, which one? A, definitely A. The last two lines of the paragraph of the entire editorial is the main point of the editorial, right? Okay. Yeah, the answers on the app are slightly slower than those on YouTube, but I'm getting to see both. Excellent. I've kept my the second screen close to me. Yesterday I could not see your answers. I could not see your name. So I was slightly crippled. I was feeling slightly awkward that I can't see their names. They're saying good afternoon. Who is saying good afternoon? I can't see the name. But today I can see. I can see the names. I can see the answers. All right. Yes. All right. Let's start. Next one. Which one best reflects the author's views on the geopolitical implications, consequences, likely results of Russia's invasion? So the author has talked about the geopolitical implications of Russian invasion in one of the paragraphs. Which one of these sums up that view properly? That's what the author, the passage is asking. So you got all 5 correct, Shrishti. Fantastic in this passage. I hope many others did that too. As I said, the CR section in the CLAT 21 was easier, so we made the CR section easier. Russia might not succeed in its war against Ukraine, and India might end up being shunned by the democratic world. Correct or wrong? Russia might crush Ukraine resistance brutally, and India might find itself in an awkward position with the other democracies of the world who have shunned Russia. Close options A and B. Which one? India leads the democratic group against Russia and China. India should not allow itself to be dictated by geopolitical considerations. So quickly tell me which is a better answer, A or B. He did not say Russia might not be successful in its war against being shunned. He just says India will be shunned. He didn't say. He says think. So B is exactly reflecting what the author said, that whatever way it ends, 2 things. India will find itself awkward. If Putin is very brutal in Ukraine, the democratic world which is shunning Russia, with whom India has good relations, would wonder why is India not saying anything. So India will find itself in an awkward position. What can you infer from the passage? Again, inferences are always built around the main point. Sometimes they can give you an inference based on 3rd paragraph, but most of the times, if your understanding of the main idea of the passage is correct, inferences work out correct. Okay? And inferences are always something that is definitely true based on what's given in the passage. India's diplomacy on Russia has been a complete failure. Has the author used such a strong word? India's diplomacy on Russia is against its national interest, has the author said that. The EU nations have been following a 2-pronged strategy. So they have two aspects to it. What is that? Sanctioning Russia, aiding the Ukrainian resistance, buying Russian energy on the other. Russia and China will gang up against India if it takes a hardened stand, totally against what the author has said. So the correct answer is C. How many of you got that right now and in the exam also, I hope? All right. Now the next passage is a very interesting passage, and it, we condemn we say people who are not caring about the climate, continuing to use fossil fuels. This gives the other side of the picture. Why is it happening? And it's very interesting. The staff at Big Cabal, a media startup, wanted to ditch its diesel generator but needed something to keep the office air conditioners running. So there is this company, a media startup called Big Cabal, and it decided that, listen, we don't want to use diesel generators. Diesel generators are polluting, but we want the AC running. So what did they decide? Why? The generator is noisy, expensive, and bad for the environment. So they wanted to get rid of the generator. Hoping for a greener solution to its problem, it bought solar panels for its 2-story office building. So it bought solar panels. But the leap to solar didn't go according to plan. But this change to solar energy didn't go according to plan. The reasons illuminate the big challenges Africa faces from climate change. They've taken the example of one company which tried to grow green but failed and said that this story shows you the challenges that Africa as a nation faces from climate change. What is that? The reason is rich in fossil fuels and is eager to use them to fix its notoriously unreliable power grid. So it has a lot of fossil fuels, coal, and it wants to use it because it has very, very unreliable power grids. But to slow down global warming, nations must burn less oil and gas, not more. So one side it has a lot of fossil fuels which it can use, oil and coal and gas. On the other side, oil and gas we must use it less because they cause global warming. Meantime, Africa is heating up much faster than the rest of the world. So it is feeling the effects of climate change much faster than the rest of the world. For starters, now again he's gone back to this big cabal example. They found that solar panels cost about 3 times more than the generator in maintenance cost. It's okay to put up solar panels and say I'm going green, but they cost 3 times as much as a generator for maintenance. And even though the company's finance manager scouted for the most powerful units the company could afford, they weren't enough to run the air conditioners. So they got the most powerful they bought the most powerful solar panels. They tried to maintain it as well as they could, but still it wasn't effective enough. The air conditioning was not effective enough. So while the big cabal staff who write technology and culture news sweltered in the summer heats, the AC units hummed cheerfully and pushed out warm air. So what happened is, it wasn't effective. They were sitting in the heat, the ACs were not effective. We had to buy more batteries and more panels, as well as special air conditioners that work with solar inverters, devices that can accommodate battery storage. So for this, they had to buy a lot of things. Now that caused a lot of problems. So what did they do? They brought back the diesel generator. The diesel generator is back, screaming behind the offices, noisy. The company switches between power from the local utility, the generator and solar panels. Local utility, whenever the local power supply is there, they use that. When it is not there, they use the generators and sometimes the solar panels. That is how they are doing. That juggling act gets to the heart of a big question facing African nations. So this juggling act that they are doing, this is the problem that African nations are facing. What is that? Notorious means infamous, opposite of famous, famous for a bad way. Notoriety means ill fame. That juggling act gets to the heart of a big question. It addresses the main question that African nations face. Who gets to keep using fossil fuels and for how long during the transition to clean energy? So they said African nations must change to clean energy. But what about those fossil fuels? Who's going to use them? The coal and the natural gas and the oil reserves that Africa has. When they say cut in Africa, what do they want to cut? Asked Titus, a Zimbabwe-based climate director at the Open Society Foundation, a grants organization. They say cut fossil fuels. What do they mean by cut, he's asking. There's nothing to cut here. African countries are at the receiving end of this problem. It is the bigger emitters that should have the responsibility to cut. We should be sensitive to history. Africa is not the biggest emitter of carbon dioxide. The developed nations which are. So he says, why should we cut? What should we cut? Okay. A swift transition is crucial in the global fight against climate change. But not only would that be particularly costly in poorer nations, many African nations have an abundance of natural gas and other fossil fuels, and they would argue forcefully that the rest of the world doesn't have a right to tell them not to use it. First thing, yes, it's good if they change to cleaner energy, okay, because it's going to be costly otherwise. But the problem is African nations have plenty of fossil fuels. So they are asking, why are you asking us not to use the fuels that we have in abundance? Proven crude oil reserves on the African continent total more than 100 billion spanning. So he has now given you how Africa has an abundance of fossil fuels. Lot of statistics about that. As the world leaders meet at COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland, this means it was given just before this article was written just before the Glasgow summit. Some African leaders and activists are, for the first time, vocally opposing a speedier pivot to renewables for their countries. They are saying we are not going to make a speedy or a fast transition from fossil fuels to cleaner energy. We're not going to do it. We're going to do it slowly. They are saying the transition should be slow, one that would embrace a continued reliance on fossil fuels, particularly natural gas, which burns more cleanly than coal or oil, but still pumps carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So what is the African position now? We'll continue to use fossil fuels, not coal, right, but natural gas, not coal or oil. So natural gas is cleaner than the others, but we're going to make this transition slowly. We'll use a combination. Okay. But what the author says is that also leads to carbon dioxide emissions. Which of the following cannot be inferred from the passage? So remember, there are two types of questions that they ask here. One is where they say all can be inferred except, or they will say which one cannot be inferred. Both of them mean the same thing, but you have to remember that the answer choice is one which cannot be inferred. That means three can be inferred, one cannot be. Let me just have a swig of water. All right. African countries need to rely on fossil fuels to meet energy demands. True. They can't do without it because cleaner energy is more expensive and they have fossil fuels anyway. African countries should not be forced to switch to renewable energy. Yes, their leaders are saying, who are you to tell us to switch to it? We will use what we like or what is convenient when we have so much of the reserves. African countries are caught between a rock and a hard place, caught in a dilemma, right? Both are bad. If they use fossil fuels, it's causing global warming, and Africa is heating up faster than any other continent. If they don't use, their power needs are not met and they have plenty of fuels. So all three are correct. They are the major culprits causing the climate crisis? No. Who are the major culprits according to Africa? It is the developed nations, the richer nations. Which of the following can be concluded? Again, an easy question. Yes, D was the answer to that. Which of the following can be concluded? African regions are rich in fossil fuels. Solar panels are expensive and adequate to meet the demands of the region. Both A and B or none of the above. Quickly, 12. Answer. Cannot be concluded. Yeah, not can be concluded. Mayur, that is correct. Your friends are right. It says which one cannot be concluded. I underlined cannot also. All right, 12. Let me just see your answers. Many of you are marking C. C is wrong. Why? It cannot be both A and B because B is wrong. Solar panels are expensive is correct. Expensive to maintain, not expensive per se, not expensive as such. And they are not adequate to meet the demands of the nation. They don't have enough. So B is wrong. So the answer is only A. All right? Not C, not B. B is wrong. Solar panels are expensive. Solar panels are expensive to maintain. The maintenance is expensive, he said. By themselves, he didn't say they are expensive. And the second thing is, they are not adequate, which is why they are using a combination, right? All right. In the statement, this is an inference question, okay? And this is a slightly subjective answer, but because of the options given, it makes life easier. When they say cut in Africa, what do they want to cut? Who is referred to as they? What do they want to cut? Want us to cut? Which is the they? North American nations, European nations, third world countries, definitely not third world countries. But North American nations and European nations together can be called developed nations. But instead of developed nations, they have given the word rich nations. Right? So answer is D. Some questions have to be slightly subjective. In the mocks also we do that. Alright, question 14. According to the passage, why should the transition to clean energy not be fast-tracked in Africa? They said let this transition be slow. You can't force it, you can't speeden it up. Why? African countries can afford clean energy. African nations can easily acquire money by selling fossil fuels. African nations are not responsible for the climate crisis, or they have large fossil fuel reserves and they believe that they should be allowed to do what they want. What is their opinion? Even as they went to Glasgow, they said, look, we know we have fossil fuels, you can't dictate to us. Let us decide, we will use a combination. Therefore, the answer is D. A, B, C are all wrong. Here they can't afford. Clean energy is expensive. Second, nobody talked about selling fossil fuels. Whoever uses fossil fuel, it is bad for the environment. Alright, what is the author's attitude towards those who are pressing for a slower transition towards renewable energy? What is his attitude? Good question. Actually, it is a fantastic question. And I hope you got it right. Author supports them half-heartedly, 50-50. Sometimes or not full support. Or that's what happens to me in IPL matches. Favorite player will be playing for one team. RCB is my favorite because I stay in Bangalore as a team. So I am always half-heartedly I'll be supporting the teams. Okay. So the author supports them half-heartedly. Does he say half 50-50? No. Author is against them, has he said? It's wrong. African nation shouldn't do it wholeheartedly. No, he hasn't given any personal opinion. He's a smart fellow. He says neither this nor that. This is the position, this is the position, this is the position. What is his personal opinion? We don't know. D. Neutral, excellent. Okay. Now, next passage. After keeping prices on hold since November last year, retail prices of petrol and diesel were raised on Wednesday by 80 paise for the second straight day. However, considering that global crude prices have surged over the past few months, the price of Indian crude baskets to this much, retail fuel prices will need to be hiked considerably to bring them in line with the global market prices. When you are given a lot of statistics, the best thing to do is what I did just now, that petrol prices were raised slightly, 80 paise, but he says depending on how global fuel prices have risen, India should have, the price rise should have been much higher to cope with that. So the actual price rise was a lot and the government only raised it by 80 paise. It could have been much more. It should have been higher considerably. As per CRISIL, with crude oil having averaged $100 on the ongoing quarter, retail price of petrol and diesel would need to be increased by 9 to 12 rupees to ensure a full pass-through. So when you look at the global rise in prices, it is not 80 paise but 9 to 12 rupees that should have been the hike. The decision to keep retail prices on hold despite surging global crude oil prices, leaving oil marketing companies to absorb the losses does suggest that fuel pricing decisions continue to be driven not by commercial considerations but political compulsions. The decision to keep retail prices on hold, not to raise or hike fuel prices, is because of political reasons. If it had been economic, commercial reasons, it makes sense to increase it by 9 to 12 rupees. But why government had political reasons not to increase the prices? That's what the author says. What does he say? The retail prices were kept on hold till the conclusion of elections in Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Goa, Manipur and Uttarakhand. To limit the impact on the end consumers, government at both so he says they only kept it, they didn't hike it till the elections. Now the author is coming up with a suggestion. The government could have offset some part of the price hikes by cutting the taxes imposed on petrol and diesel. Instead of just doing what it did, the government could have offset some of the price hikes by cutting taxes imposed. Higher crude oil prices, even if partially passed through, will be inflationary. So when you have higher crude prices, eventually the result is inflation. The decision of oil marketing companies to increase the price of bulk diesel by 25 per liter, even as it distorts the market, will also end up being inflationary. So considering this scenario, so he's saying inflation is the inevitable result of crude oil price rise. And the RBI will have to revise its outlook on inflation in the next monetary policy. All right, next part he says that in the last MPC meeting held just after the union budget was presented, central bank had projected a 5.7% inflation. He says now it is likely to be increased. Next paragraph done. The longer the conflict between Russia and Ukraine persists, the longer crude oil prices remain elevated, the more challenging the policy environment will be. He says as long as the Russia-Ukraine crisis persists, crude oil prices will remain high and the policy environment, policy making for the government will be challenging. First question, which of the following, if true, would strengthen the argument that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is going to keep the crude oil prices inflated or high? In our history, war has been the reason behind the rise of crude oil prices across the globe. Is it A? Analysts have suggested that crude oil shortage due to sanctions on Russia is likely to keep the crude oil prices up. B? Or both A and B? Which one? Quickly, question 16, the toughest question in the set. Only for a small reason. All people who are careless will get it wrong. No, not C. Why not C? Well, if it's not C, it has to be B, you will say. Why not C? Our history is not we are talking about. We are not talking about the reason for crude oil prices. Our history says war increased crude oil prices. So right now also there is a war somewhere in some corner of the world, so crude oil prices will be high. How is that an answer? So the answer is B, that analysts have suggested there's a shortage. Why is the shortage there? Because a lot of countries will not buy oil from the sanctions against Russia. Russia cannot supply oil. We don't know what the situation in Europe will be. Eventually Europe may have to stop. It's not stopping because America buys very little oil from Russia. America doesn't buy any, a very small percentage. So America would say sanctions, I won't buy from Russia. Europe would be left in the limbo, so Europe is not stopping the oil part of it. But the whole point is whatever the passage has told us that as long as the war continues, crude oil prices will be high. On top of that, analysts are saying that because of the sanctions, crude oil supply, there will be a shortage. So that will be correct. Okay. Why not A? Because A has given the reason for a rise in crude oil prices, which is incomplete, and it's talking about our history. The answer is talking about overall crude oil prices. It's talking of global crude oil prices. And you are saying in our history, whenever we have had a war, crude oil prices have been high. Okay? That is number one. Second is only giving the reason for crude oil prices being high. Question is why will the conflict keep the crude oil prices high? So you have to relate the Russia-Ukraine conflict to the high price of crude oil. Not history says, right? That becomes a very general reason. And you can always in reasoning ask, just because it happened there doesn't mean it's going to happen now. Which one will weaken the argument that price hike in petrol and diesel was justified? Author is saying they gave a small price hike, they should have been much higher. right? So which one would weaken the argument that price hike was justified? Which one would say that no, it was not justified, without hiking the prices in petrol and diesel, some other solution was possible? Which one is that? Given the rise in crude oil prices across the globe, it was necessary to hike the price of fossil fuels to counterbalance the losses faced by the petroleum companies. This does not weaken, does it? B, the price hike should have occurred before the assembly elections. It's only talking about the timing of the hike, so it is not strengthening or weakening. The government should not have waited this long to jack up the prices. That would strengthen, that would justify. Answer is no. Instead of hiking prices, the government could have done something with the taxes, counterbalanced with the taxes that it has already imposed. Got it? That's what he has suggested in the passage also. The author's opinion regarding the higher crude price and inflation is what? What is the author's opinion? What is the connection he is drawing between higher crude prices and inflation? Higher crude oil prices will lead to inflation. Higher crude oil prices would lead to taxation. Higher crude oil prices will lead to higher taxable revenue, or will be detrimental to economic growth. Question 18, what's your answer? What is the connection the author makes between higher crude prices and inflation? A, B, C, or D? Quick. A, he says anytime higher crude oil prices are inflationary, even if it's a 25%, 2 point, whatever, even if it's a small raise, it will affect the railways, transport, so overall the effect is inflationary, it causes inflation. A. Question 19, what can you infer from the passage? Again, either the main point or one of the points that we restated. Government deliberately withheld increasing fuel prices for political gains. Fuel prices were expected to rise in this quarter. It was expected that there would be a huge buzz on the rise in fuel prices. Increased fuel prices would ensure that the markets remain deflated ahead of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Easiest question in the set. Answer is again A. He says it is not economic considerations but political compulsions which made the government hold back. Again, one more. What can you infer from the passage? The Russia-Ukraine conflict is going to damage our economic prospects significantly. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is likely to pose significant challenges to our policy formation. It will test our foreign relations with both nations, or none of the above. Did he say anything about foreign relations with Russia and India? Did it say anything about our economic prospects? It just said crude oil and inflation. Therefore, significant challenges to our policy formation. Last line of the passage, what did it say? The last line of the passage, quickly let me take you back. I told you always the important inference questions are based on the main idea. More challenging to the policy environment. So the conflict is going to be a challenge for us in terms of policy formation. All right, clear? Okay, next passage. One more passage on COVID. Next mock, hopefully we will not be talking so much about COVID. All right, this is about COVID and its impact on education. COVID has robbed close to 2 priceless years from young students, and this has hurt them not just from an academic point of view. At least 13 states have so far reopened schools, while others have been toying with the idea. So it says COVID has hurt students not just academically. Next, as the third wave witnessed a sharp dip, the country is staring at one of its biggest challenges ever, the educational crisis. Once this COVID is almost going, one thing we are looking at is an educational crisis. According to the Department of School Education and Literacy, 24 crore school children were impacted by the pandemic, 12 crore from classes 1 to 5. All of them, the Parliamentary Standing Committee, suffered instructional loss. All these students, 24 crore students, suffered instructional loss. Means they couldn't have classes. They didn't have instructions or teaching. If one needs to understand the true nature of the problem, ASCR 21 report provides a glimpse. It says 1 in every 3 classes never attended in-person school before. So these people who started taking, who lost due to COVID, 1 in every 3 children in classes 1 and 2 never attended in-person school before also. Entry to the world of formal education is a difficult prospect as it is, but the challenges these people face as learners are likely to be far more complex than it would have been pre-pandemic. Second, in addition to the critical loss of learning, the absence of key social interactions that shape the well-being of children and their ultimate future is the most disturbing outcome of the crisis. So remember, the first paragraph, he says, not just academically. Of course, they lost academically. There was instructional loss. But along with that, what was the other loss? Absence of key social interactions. These interactions that you have with your classmates, the social interactions, are a key to your development and to your ultimate future. That is the most disturbing outcome according to the author. What is heartening, what is reassuring, can make us happy is that the center has seized of the matter and it has taken a spate of measures. The central government has taken a lot of measures to bridge this gap. 1 class, 1 TV channel, digital university made e-learning possible. Here the states have a, then what is that? Yeah. No, here, the last line. Bridging the huge learning gap is the need of the hour. What is the main concern right now? To bridge the knowledge gap. There's a big gap in knowledge. A lot of people don't have it, some people have it. This gap of knowledge is big. We have to bridge this knowledge gap. And in bridging the knowledge gap, the states have a huge role to play because of the demographic divide, economic disparity, and wide gender gap in education. These are the 3 factors. Demographic divide. Demographic is the way a population is distributed, right? So that demographic divide is there. Cities, more schools, more children learn. Villages, less school. That's called a demographic divide. Second, economic disparity. People who have money, people who don't have. And third is boys versus girls. Gender gap also is there in education. So there are 3 types of problems, and states have a huge role to play in it. It cannot be a one-size-fits-all strategy. The center must handhold them, means guide them, or else it will be difficult to compensate the loss that we are looking at. Short passage, slightly hard, let's look at it. What is the impact of COVID-19 on education? Like the world, the education system was also left in crisis. True. Is this the answer? There's a tremendous loss in learning among the students. True. Is this the answer? Some states felt the impact more than the others, and people across the demographic divide were impacted differently. Is this the answer? There was a loss of learning and social interactions which impacted the learning of students. When you find a lot of options looking correct, look for the most comprehensive answer, and the most comprehensive answer here is D. Not just learning and social interactions. What can you deduce? That means infer or conclude from the passage. The state and center should work together to bridge the education gap by focusing on the demographic divide, economic disparity, and wide gender gap in education. The sole responsibility of bridging the education gap lies with the states. Education crisis cannot be solved without bridging the gender divide. The centers is responsible for the present crisis. Which is the answer? A, all of you? Yeah? No, center is responsible for the present crisis. He did not say. The pandemic was responsible for it. Education only gender divide is partially correct. Sole responsibility is wrong. So the answer has to be A. All right. all of the following are true except, so you just look at facts which have been mentioned in the passage. If you are in doubt, you can go back to the passage, but if you know see, one of the things I tell students, should we refer back to the passage? When in doubt, yes. Otherwise, if it is very clear cut, you don't have to. In the 2 years of COVID-19, there was a loss in terms of academics and other factors also for school-going children. True, then that's not the answer. I'm just telling you. Reopening schools is an important step to addressing the crisis in education. If that is true, then that's not the answer. The center must follow a uniform strategy for all states to bridge the education gap in the country. Measures such as expansion of one class, one TV channel, digital university will help address the educational needs of the country. So these three have been mentioned. What is wrong with C? Not because it's incomplete. It gives one wrong word. You cannot have a one size fits all. One size fits all means sabke liye large t-shirt le lo, it will fit. No. The center has to address the problem, work with the states. One size fits all will not work. One size fits all means uniformity. So it's exactly opposite of what the author has said. All right, next one. What can you infer from 24? Here the states have a huge role to play because of the demographic divide, economic disparity and wide gender gap. From this, what can you deduce? Why does he say states have a huge role to play? The center doesn't have data factors, data points. That's why the states have a role to play. Can you conclude this? The states are in a better position to deal with such factors because they are local issues and they vary widely. Can you deduce this? Or the regional political parties are more efficient. That's why states are in a better position to solve. Or education is a state subject and only states can make laws regarding education. Which one? Answer is B. Now, we cannot say that because the center doesn't have data, it has to work along with the states. That is not definitely true. States are in a better position. Maybe they have better data. Maybe they are in a better position because these are local issues. He did not say anything about political parties. And this, nothing has been written about state subject and concurrent list and union list. But for your information, education is not a state subject, is it? It comes under the concurrent list. It's not a state subject. Which of the following supports the author's main argument regarding the educational crisis? Just look at a point which is closest to the author's main point. Distance education is the key to bridging the education gap. Is that supporting it? Unless the states and center work together, the education crisis will worsen and widen the educational gap. Is that the right answer? The ACER reports has many inaccuracies and exaggerations, or India faced a crisis in education even before the pandemic. So the effect of the pandemic was not significant. Which one is correct? B? All of you? All right. Last set of questions. All right. Let's start. After the most severe global recession in decades, private, and always the last paragraph seems to be my favorite. Let me just take a sip of water. After the most severe global recession in decades, private and official forecasters are increasingly optimistic that the world output will recover strongly this year and thereafter. But the coming expansion will be unevenly distributed both across and within economies. Whether the recovery is V-shaped, U-shaped, W-shaped will depend on several factors across different economies and regions. The reason I'm telling you is already we have only 10 minutes. So how are we going to read this fast and understand? Is where he says pandemic is over, recovery is on, this recovery is on of different type. Whether it's going to be U, V, W depends on a lot of factors. Finished. With the coronavirus still running rampant in many countries, one key question is whether the emergence of virulent new strains will trigger repeated stop and go cycles. Open lockdown, lockdown again. whether this will go on, where economies, or one particularly ominous possibility is that more vaccine resistant variants may appear, we may need more vaccines, and vaccination has been slow in many regions. So as economies open, we are still worried. What if a fourth wave comes? We need more vaccination. Then many regions of the world haven't taken or don't have enough vaccination. Clear. Next, beyond the virus, there are a number of related economic risks to consider. Virus related, this is one problem, but beyond the virus also we have a lot of economic problems. What are they? A recovery that is slow or insufficiently robust could result in permanent scarring if too many firms go bust and labor markets start exhibiting hysteresis. He has defined what is hysteresis. When you are out of work and after many days when you get back work, you lose the skill if the gap is too big. That's called hysteresis. So basically he's saying the other economic problems beside the virus, one of them is slow recovery is bad for the economy. Another question is, how will deleveraging be among highly indebted firms? Firms which have borrowed a lot of money, how are you going to deal with them? All right. Another area of concern is socio-political. Will rising inequality become an even more important source of instability and depressed demand? Okay. Likewise, it remains to be seen if macro policy stimulus will be sufficient, insufficient, or excessive, lead to inflation. What will it do? So there are a lot of uncertainties because of the virus and beyond the virus economic concerns. Keeping all these uncertainties in mind, the recovery currently looks like it will be stronger in these countries, US, China, and Asian emerging markets. And in the US, they're going to have a robust recovery this year. I read through it quickly because the questions in the exam also you have to rush through the last two. Why does the author believe that the world's economic recovery is going to be uneven? Go back to what we read, various factors, right? Various factors. So now which answer gives us that? Because not every country is strong enough to hold on to multiple lockdowns, because America and China are the biggest superpowers, or because most developed, because despite the pandemic induced slowdown, they have ramped up vaccinations and inoculation. So the answer is D. Ideal time would be 3 minutes to read, even 2.5 minutes is fine. I made the mistake of hurrying through right now, as you saw. I said A and B galat hai, must be C. That is the biggest. No, it's not C, it's D. None of the above. All right. So you just read the important sentences, one in each, leave out the statistics and see if you can answer main point questions, main theme, what can be inferred, and you will get it. Okay. All right. 27. What's the author's opinion about the world's economic recovery? The world is likely to recover strongly from the pandemic, not going to recover as strongly. There are many question marks over the economic recovery. The world economy will recover, but the economy will depend on various aspects of growth. If you read the passage properly, remember, yes, lot of answers are correct. D, because there are various factors and the author has given various factors. Okay, Bhumika, why D for 26 you are asking, I think, right? 26, let me quickly go back to it. He did not say that multiple lockdowns in America. He did not say anything about superpowers. He did not say vaccination procedure and inoculation has been ramped up. He's saying many regions in the country haven't had enough vaccination. That's why the earlier question D is not the right answer. Here D is the right answer. Here also D is the right answer, because the entire passage, all I read was there are various factors. We didn't even have time to read the various factors, read about the various factors. What can you conclude from the passage? 28. A, B, C or D. Economy is reliant not only on the virus but also on other aspects of economic activity. The virus's impact will be the most influential factor. Socio-political issues are likely to play a key role. Virus will be just one of the many factors that will govern the economic progress as we move on from the pandemic. So is it A or D? A, read it carefully, the wording. Our economy is not dependent on the virus. Therefore, no economy is reliant on a virus. What is the statement saying? Our economic progress will be one of the factors. The virus and its progress will be a factor in our economic progress. Do you get the meaning? One which is saying we are dependent on the virus to progress. The other one is saying that our economic progress is dependent on how the virus is going. Are the infections more or not? So A plays with the words. A is wrong. Go home and read that sentence 3 times and tell me why it's wrong. All right. 29. Which one would strengthen the main idea? What is the main idea? There are various factors other than the virus which will determine the economic progress, right? So 29 is a large question. Let's leave 29, but let's read the first 2 options. Your answers are between the first 2 options. Based on the study of various nations in terms of their size, population and resources, a recent study has come to a conclusion that economic progress is likely to be stronger in certain developed and developing countries and weaker in others. So he said, right, there are various factors which determine the development. So it's likely to help some like India, China, US. It's not likely to work in some, so A is. What is wrong with this? He says stronger in Western countries, weaker in Asian countries. But India is there, China is there, so this will not go with it. So 29 answer is A. Last question of the set. What can you infer from the passage? 30. Various factors will govern the economic progress as we move on from the pandemic, but some factors will outweigh others. Did he tell us which factors will be more, which will be less? The pandemic will wreak havoc on small and medium scale businesses. Has he told us about businesses? The impact of the pandemic on businesses and economic growth as a whole is pretty uncertain. Amongst this uncertainty, right, he did not say which factors will outweigh what. Depends on various factors. Therefore, the answer is C. All right, clear? Okay, so our analysis is done. I hope you did well in the test. The key is not so much doing well in the test, but realizing where did I make a mistake and why. I'm not going to make the mistake again, right? Okay, tomorrow you'll have an analysis of the legal section by Nivedita. It's at 3 p.m. and again at 9:30 Ankur will analyze the quant section for you, and on April 10th Abhimanyu will do the current section analysis. If you've taken the test, do attend the analysis. Even if you haven't taken the test, attend the analysis. You'll learn a lot. All right, so till I meet you next time, study hard. The harder you work, the better you get. This is Savitri Krishnamurthy signing off for BYJU'S. Take care. Bye-bye.